is at the location where you're expected to start talking about business, it's going to take you a while and you may run out of time. So we try to put you together in advance so you have plenty of time to get all the initial information out of the way. And when you see each other, you'll be that much closer to making a deal. We believe, and Reverend Sullivan always believed, in making the bridge between Africa and America. And that bridge is built and fortified by business. When you do well and we do well, we have a stake in making that bridge work. And a lot of the businesses that you're in someday will be much larger than they are now. And that comes with the cooperation of organizations like ours, the Sullivan Foundation, the Coalition on Trade and Investment, and it comes from us sharing information with each other. So that's why we hope to stay in touch with you, and we were very honored and very happy to meet you, and we wish you the best of luck upon your return home, and let's not make this the last time we stay in touch with each other. So I think that's it. Okay.
Where in Africa is this?
This is not in Africa.
It might be Seychelles. That's Africa.
I was going to say it's going to be the Seychelles. All right, where am I sitting?
Right in the middle
Over
there.
there.
We'll speak from the podium. Oh,
Yeah.
You can, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a photo speaker.
It's an old Irish trade.
Good morning, everyone.
Might have to wave my arms or defend myself.
Good morning, everyone. We welcome you back to the center. I hope you all had a good evening and enjoyed yesterday, both the conference and the reception at the end. We probably have a few new people in the room, so let me welcome you. Most were here at least for part of yesterday. This is the Woodrow Wilson Center. I am Steve McDonald, the director of the Africa program. We are the hosts of this conference on AGOA and on Civil Society Forum. It's being co-sponsored by the Shell Company, by Manchester Trade, and by the Coalition for African Development. Today's festivities will begin with an address from Congressman Jim McDermott, who has been a key player in creating the AGOA legislation. But to introduce him, I'm going to bring to the podium someone who knows him quite well and someone who you know quite well by now, Tony Carroll. I don't need to introduce Tony. You've got his bio in front of you anyway. But Tony is a member of the Advisory Council for My Africa program, a valued member and a very good friend. And so let me ask Tony to please introduce Jim.
Good morning, Dumela, bienvenidos, bienvenue, Jambo. You are all welcome. The last one was a Nigerian greeting. It's great to see you all back here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and it's my distinct honor this morning to introduce someone whose association with AGOA goes back to day one. Congressman Jim McDermott from Seattle, Washington, is no stranger to Africa. He first embarked into Africa in the 1960s as before medical school or after medical school, Jim?
Halfway through.
Halfway through medical school to go to Ghana to work as a volunteer in Ghana. He has distinguished himself. He's a medical doctor. He spent a career in Washington state politics in the Washington Senate. He also ran for governor. He served a period of time as a regional medical officer in the DRC, formerly Zaire. So he knows Central Africa, he knows West Africa. And then as a fairly junior member of the Ways and Means Committee, he decided because of the globalization and trade, he felt that Africa was going to be left aside in the globalization process and embarked upon what we now know as AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. Jim has provided great leadership in the House of Representatives on trade issues of all types, and his heart really is with Africa. I'm delighted to introduce Jim to you here today, and let me just add before bringing Jim up to the platform, Jim, the delegation in front of you here are 35 women entrepreneurs,
Yes.
who have been chosen to come to Washington for the AGOA Forum. And we'll also be traveling to Kansas City next week to meet with American businesses in America's heartland. So, Jim, I'm delighted and honored to bring you to the podium to welcome us and open up our event today. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Tony. You took about half my speech away. I see some faces out here that I saw the other morning with Nita Lowey's group over in the Capitol. So some of you may have heard a little of what I'm going to say here, but I was very pleased to be asked to come and talk about this whole issue of AGOA. When you look at AGOA from my standpoint, you think of the analogy of the half-full, half-empty glass. One can look at what has happened under AGOA and say, well, yeah, gee, but there's a lot. You can always see the half-empty. But my belief is that we can look at the half full. We've come a long way. When I went to Ghana in 1961, at the beginning of independence for many of your countries, and there was great excitement in Africa. In Ghana, they were pointing to piles of bauxite, and they were going to make aluminum, and they were going to dam the Volta River, and they were going to have electricity, and they were going to be a smelter there, and they were going to have a whole industry that was going to come out of aluminum. They already had cocoa, and they had gold, and they had all kinds of things, and so it was clearly that there was no question but Ghana was going to keep going up. When I got to Congress in 1988, Ghana was just about where it had been in 1960 economically when I was there some years before. And in the interim, I had been in Africa as a regional medical officer for the State Department. I was based in Kinshasa, and I traveled everything from Gabon to Somalia to the Republic of South Africa. I saw 26 countries. I did 80,000 miles in 7 months, so I really got to see what was going on in Africa in 1987, 1988. And, of course, the AIDS epidemic was exploding at the same time. So when I got to Congress, I had a couple of things on my mind. One was, of course, the AIDS epidemic and what we're going to do about that, and I won't say very much about that, but I think that that's an issue that has been right there on the table and needs discussion all the time, because it's now becoming another problem as we sort of cut back and the world cuts back on its money on treatment, and there's a lot of questions. But the other thing on my mind was, I live in Seattle. We are the most trade-dependent area of the United States. 1 out of 3 people in Seattle make their living in international trade. Most of it, of course, with Asia, because that's where we're closest to. We are the closest port to Korea and Japan and Asia, and much of what comes to this country from Asia goes through Seattle on its way to Chicago. Some people call Seattle Chicago West because it is the port that receives most of what goes to the Middle West. So I knew about our trade policy with Asia, and basically what we told the Asians was, if you make something, send it in here and we'll sell it in the United States. That's basically what our policy was. We had an open door to the Koreans and the Japanese and the Taiwanese, and everybody who was making anything was sending it through to the United States to be sold. We were the market of the world. Well, when I got to Congress, I got on the Ways and Means Committee, and one of the responsibilities of the Ways and Means Committee is to handle all the trade legislation of this country. And I was absolutely the bottom member. I was the most junior member on the committee, and along came the World Trade Organization legislation in 1995. And I said to my staff man, who was an African American who had studied economics at the University of Massachusetts. His name was Mike Williams. Some of you may have met him at some point. And I said to Mike, what does this do for Africa? He said, nothing. We don't have any trade policy toward Africa. WTO doesn't mean anything to Africa. I said, well, that doesn't make sense. Why don't we start something? So we put a little section in the bill. It was a very unobtrusive, about 3 lines that said, the President of the United States shall, by December 31st, 1995, give us a trade policy for Africa. And we thought, well, we've started the ball rolling. And the interesting thing about the attitude in this country at that point, I mean, here's 800 million people in Africa, and there was nobody at Treasury, nobody at State, nobody at Commerce, nobody in the USTR who had any responsibility for Africa. The guy who was in charge in the Commerce Department, actually, at that point, for Africa was from Arkansas and had never been out of the United States. So you can get a sort of a feeling about what kind of intention there was. So when we started this ball rolling, we thought, well, we'll just wait and the president will come with a proposal shortly. Well, the USTR at that point was very interested in what was going on in Asia. That was the era of the Asian tigers. And you could invest $1 in Asia and make 5 just like that. So everybody wanted to invest in Asia. Why waste your time in Africa? what's that all about? Let's keep it. And so their whole attention was on, well, it came along about the 15th of December, and I got a phone call from the trade representative, and he said, we're a little behind. We haven't quite got the trade policy put together. Would you mind if we waited a little bit, maybe in the next year? And I said, well, of course, I can understand. You got a lot of problems and blah, blah, blah. So came along about the 1st of February, and they came over to us, and they had a great big pile of paper all stapled together, which was the reports on all the USAID projects in Africa. I said, well, this is no policy. This is what you did, not what you're going to do. This is the past. What are you doing to us? So we got mad and wrote our own bill. We wrote the bill, and we, as you may remember, you don't remember our politics, but 1994 was a bad year. The Republicans took over, and I was a minor member of the Democratic Party, and there wasn't anybody interested in what was going to happen to Africa. President Clinton, of course, was planning a trip to Africa, and nothing had happened. And so I knew the speaker. He and I had an interesting experience together, not a pleasant one, I must say. But I knew something about him. And so one day I went to him and I said, Mr. Gingrich, you should take this AGOA and pass it out of here. And he said, why should I do that? And I said, because you and I share an experience. I know you care about Africa. He said, what do you know? I said, I know what you wrote your Ph.D. thesis on. He wrote his Ph.D. thesis on elementary and secondary education in the Belgian Congo in 1958 to 1964. He said, how did you find that out? I said, don't ask questions like that. I know it. And I said, you and I've lived in the Congo. You've written about them. We ought to do something about this. So he and I put this bill on the track in the House of Representatives. And when Mr. Clinton came to Africa in 1999, it had not passed out of the Congress. It had only passed out of the House of Representatives. It was only halfway through the process. But the president said this is going to be our policy for Africa. And lo and behold, when he got back, the Senate passed it, and it went into effect. Now, in the democratic process, one of the things that you learn very quickly is that you never get what you want. You always get about, if you get 50%, you got a pretty good deal. If you get 60%, you really have scored. And what I envisioned in 1995 when we wrote this policy was different than what came out in 2000. I didn't get everything I wanted. But the other thing that you learn in politics is that you have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So there you've seen AGOA 1 and AGOA 2 and AGOA 3 have been our attempts every year to fix something that we'd find out didn't work. We'd write something, and we have a saying in America that Murphy's Law applies at all times. Now, Murphy's Law is that it's the law of unintended consequences. You go one way and you think this is what's going to happen, but something else happens over here and you say, well, how did that happen? Well, that's Murphy's Law. Just what you didn't expect will happen. And so we have been changing the act as we've gone along. Now, my feeling, my belief and my hope was that what we would do would be that we would take the textile quotas that we had given to Asia. They weren't using them anymore. They had moved up. They weren't making. They were making Toyotas, and they were making computers and all kinds. Their textile quotas were. They had shoved it down the line. We said, well, let's take those textile quotas and just spread them across Africa, and let them make textiles. Because I knew you could make cloth. For heaven's sakes, I bought a piece of Kente in 1961 that I still have in my house. So I knew that Africans knew how to make clothing and make cloth and do all kinds of things. So why don't we just move from Asia, that whole textile business, to Africa? Well, it's good to have an idea like that, but the politically actually making it happen was more than more than complicated. Still hasn't happened in the way it wanted, and of course, then we, under the World Trade Organization, we got rid of the textile quotas, and so a lot of things have shifted over the course of years. My belief is that there is a tremendously untapped capacity in Africa. I still believe that. I've seen what people do. I have seen hardworking, thoughtful, creative people do things all over the continent. And I know that that's possible, and I think that AGOA still remains a mechanism by which we can make that happen. Now, I'll give you an example of one of the things that and things happen on this world stage, and you kind of got to watch them and decide there's an opportunity. There's a real opportunity for African seafood. Africa's by the ocean, a lot of it, right? Mm-hmm. And we got a big mess down in the Gulf. And a lot of seafood for the United States comes from the Gulf. So now there's a question about whether anybody's going to want to buy crawfish and shrimp and all the things that grow in the Gulf of Mexico. But there's shrimp and whatever off the coast of Africa in various places. And it's a question of how do you take that from the ocean and prepare it in such a way that it can get into the United States. Now, the African countries, actually the European Union, has been more successful than the United States in opening up for agricultural products into the European Union. And that's our fault. That's not the Africans' fault. I mean, somehow the European Union's figured out how to raise them up to a level where they can be acceptable on the food level. And we have started a program, I've put it in the bill several times, to put people from the Department of Agriculture out in Africa to actually teach the concepts of the necessities for our phytosanitary standards. If you're going to bring food into the United States, it's got to be at a certain level. Whether you're Chinese or you're African or whoever you are, we're going to protect our food. But that requires us to teach what are the standards and what do you have to do to meet those standards. Mm-hmm. And I think that with that kind of interaction between the United States and the African continent, some of the countries that are involved, it is clearly possible for the agricultural aspects of Africa to become much more profitable than they have in the past. Unfortunately, much of our interaction with African countries, in my view, has been that we are busy extracting natural resources and taking them home to use them in our country. Ghana is my perfect example. I remember how excited, I actually have a slide from 1961 of a big yellow or orange pile of dirt. They told me it was bauxite, and they said when we put the Volta River Dam in over here, we're going to smelt that bauxite, and we're going to... Well, what happened was that Kaiser Corporation came in, leased the Volta River Dam, so they had control of all the electricity, and then they brought the bauxite from Jamaica all the way over to Africa, smelted it there, and then took the aluminum down the road, the aluminum ingots. 50 jobs for Africa, and I guess probably Kwame Nkrumah perhaps got a little benefit out of all that, but nobody else in Ghana did. And we have done that, and I would just point out one thing, where there are other areas where we're working. This whole business of the 3 T's, tantalum, tin, and tungsten, the mining of those minerals in the central part of Africa, in primarily eastern Zaire, Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, being done by rebel forces using slave labor, killing women, raping women, all of that mayhem that's going on in Central Africa, which has been going on for quite some period of time. This isn't a new event. It's totally unknown in this country. Most people do not know the extent of that war that's going on in Kivu and that area of where my friends, I have some friends working at Heal Africa, which is a hospital in the middle of Goma. And I've been there and I've seen it and I know what's going on. Well, we put a bill through the Congress here recently that said that Nokia, you all got a cell phone. I mean, cell phones have taken over Africa. When I was out there, getting a phone call from Kinshasa to Seattle to my kids was almost impossible. You had to go down to the telephone company and pay somebody a little something so they could cross a few wires so that your phone call would go down the road. And now with cell phones, you can do anything, right? Well, every one of you holding a cell phone in your hand is holding some tantalum and some tungsten and some tin because it's in the motherboard in your cell phone. And it's come from these conflict mines that are being used. The money's being used from that to support the rebels and carry on this war. What we said in this bill that passed the other day, it was buried in the middle of the bank regulation bill, was a provision that said that anybody who's using those metals has to have a certificate from the State Department that they know where that tantalum and tungsten and tin came from. And otherwise, people are going to have to decide, do you want to have that conflict minerals that's leading to violence in Central Africa in your cell phone or not? So we've tried to put the squeeze on the device makers to put the squeeze on the market and make them buy their tungsten from someplace else. They can buy it. There ought to be a way to clean up the Democratic Republic of Congo's mining area, but that's going to have to follow the squeeze. It's not going to happen up front. And I think that there are so many areas in which we can be involved with one another and trying to solve mutual problems. If we care about people in the continent, in the United States, we are going to have to make some changes in this country. And I'm sure you'll be talking about quotas or the whole subsidy question on farm goods and so forth. There are a lot of things that we're working on this side, but it's good to see you here. When we envisioned AGOA, we wanted to get somebody besides foreign ministers in the room. I was looking down on a bunch of foreign ministers. They'd probably be asleep by now. So what I want, or finance ministers, I want people who are on the ground trying to sell stuff. Because I've argued with some of you people in the markets about what the price of soap is. I've negotiated or bargained. I was not a bargainer when I went to Africa, but I learned if I was going to get anything, I was going to have to work at it. And if I was going to get it at a decent price, because they could see a fool coming with his money. And I wasn't going to be taken for a fool very long. But clearly there needs to be an interaction with the civil society of Africa. And that's why it's important that you come here. We're glad to see you here. Leave your suggestions, give your suggestions, talk to people, and so we get an idea of what are the next steps we should make in AGOA. We're not going to get there in a second. But every journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And we're on about step 5 or 6, and we got a long way to go. But you are going to be a part of changing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. All right, give you a call. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jim. That has started our morning extremely well, giving us a very uplifting message. We are now going to turn to our first panel, which is going to be chaired by Tony. So I will turn the microphone back over to him and bring his panel members up.
Well, it's great to get the perspective from someone who has been involved with AGOA from the inception. In fact, my first discussion with Jim about AGOA happened on the patio or the porch of the Canadian Consul General's house on Lake Washington in Seattle in 1995 when I accompanied a delegation of SADC ambassadors to Seattle And I was with Jim and his extraordinary former chief of staff, Mike Williams, who doesn't get enough credit for the work that he did on AGOA, talking about how we can stem the marginalization of Africa. And I don't think at that point, 15-odd years ago, we thought we'd be here today. We thought that we'd have an audience of women entrepreneurs here to talk about AGOA, its successes, its shortcomings, its needed improvements, and also the larger relationship between the U.S. and African business. We'd like to continue that panel discussion and the articulation of those issues here today. And I regret to inform you that the panel that we've chosen is all men. And what an oversight, I mean, there is no excuse for this. So, in light of that tremendous oversight, at the end of our panel discussion, I'm going to ask Sui Luinwang Siki to come on up and perhaps offer a reflection as a textile producer. She and her colleague from Cameroon, whoever would like to offer brief comments or observations on the panel to give it some balance and give it some real-life perspective. So if at the end of the time, we'll call you two up and you can offer your comments. That would be great observations. I'd like to, as a prerogative of the moderator, sort of switch a little bit of the panel order that you have on your sheet. You have biographies of each of these individuals, which I think should suffice, and we won't need to take time from the limited amount of time we have this morning to discuss a complicated issue. But the title of the panel is Beyond Textiles. And I think textiles, as we heard yesterday, the numbers are not great. I think they're down 19% from last year. I think partly due to the global recession, of course. They're probably down similarly elsewhere, perhaps not as dramatically. But rather than a detailed recitation of the details of which categories have done better and which countries have done better, I think we can start with the knowledge that things are down. And we have to take a look at where we are, take a view of the countries that remain big in textiles and where they see their fortunes and their opportunities. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, continue some of the discussion of yesterday on what other items can be included in AGOA that could make greater opportunities for all of us here today. And then I'd like to conclude with a colleague of mine for many years from Nigeria, who's going to give us a presentation on some of the interesting things being done with textiles capacity, particularly in Nigeria, to use those industrial capacity for other purposes other than the traditional production of textiles and apparel. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring my good friend, longtime colleague, Jas Betty. Jas is himself a manufacturer of textiles, but also is chairman of the Kenyan Association of Manufacturers and chairman of ACTIVE, the Association of Cotton and Textile Industries, African Cotton Textile Industry Federation, right? Who will open up the panel. And then I'll turn to Nkopani Monyane from Lesotho to follow Jas. Then we'll have Steve Landy talk a little bit about the overview of textiles and other products, and then conclude with my good friend and colleague who will talk, Navdeep Sodhi, about the situation in Nigeria. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to Jas to start things off. Thank you.
Too many corny jokes about women. I'm sorry. There's too many corny jokes about women. You know. That's not just showing acceptance. You here yesterday? You here yesterday? No. Oh, same thing the whole night.
All right. Okay. I'll put your key here, so once come back and get it.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Tony, for that introduction. I think I would like to present my presentation slightly differently, in the sense that I think Africa's value chain and connecting that value chain is possible. And I want to start with some headline numbers. And these headline numbers were in the latest McKinsey report. I don't know how many of us have seen that report, but that report actually is mind-boggling. It actually tells you where Africa is going. It's giving you a feeling that the future of this world is Africa and the next frontier is Africa. So if you look at these numbers up here, on the left is Africa today, and on the right is Africa tomorrow. And if you look at the GDP numbers for the continent, is $1.6 trillion. That is today. And what is going to be in 2020 is $2.6 trillion. So we see a jump of $1 trillion on the GDP in 10 years from now. The consumer spending, at the moment, $860 billion. Consumer spending in 2010 will be $1.4 trillion. Again, we're doubling numbers here. The year 2000, there were 316 new mobile connections in Africa. By 2040, it'll be 1.1 billion. 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, that is what it is a story today. 52 cities with more than 1 million people. And there are 20 companies with revenues more than 30 billion in Africa. And of course, going forward, we can see 128 million households with discretionary income, and 50% of the population will be in the cities by 2030. And we're looking at a population explosion as well. At the moment, I think we're combined population of Africa is about 1 billion, which is the same size of India, a little bit less than China. And by 2030 and 2040, the numbers that the World Bank report shows is going to double as well. It's going to be 2 billion people. So we see a massive growth in Africa, and everybody out there is looking at Africa as the next frontier, and the McKinsey report actually confirms that. Now a little bit on the textile value chain in Africa and the institution that I represent here today. The institution is called ACTIV, the African Cotton and Textile Industries Federation. It's made up of 19 African countries. As you can see, most of it's on the eastern side and the southern side of Africa. It's between the trading blocks of COMESA, EAC, and SADC. But it's not restrictive to the 3 trading blocks. We now have members from Nigeria. Ghana is coming on board. And it'll be the truly Pan-African federation with membership across the continent. Of course, AGOA was a catalyst for this institution to be formed. Way back in the year 2005, when we realized that we must have a unified voice of Africa. We can't be talking in a fragmented way, and we cannot push a policy forward if we're going to have many positions out of Africa. So the vision was very clear. We want to have an integrated cotton, textile, apparel value chain that competes with the world market. And of course, mission to promote trade and increase trade of textiles and apparel from Africa to the globe. The development goals are very clear as well, as you can see up on the screen. But basically, the whole idea was to get a greater slice of the pie. This is what happened in 2005. 20 African countries got together, 150 delegates in Nairobi, and that's when we decided, no, we've got to act united, we've got to be unified, we've got to have a single voice of Africa if anybody out there is going to listen to us. And that's when really the birth of ACTIV. Regional voice, unified approach. If you see the website today, we are probably the #1 website on the Cotton Africa platform. A lot of B2B that's happening. We're connecting people, connecting markets, providing information to our members. And if you look at the trade postings, we've had over $600 million of trade postings done, over 3 million hits on the website, and it's the #1 site on Google if you go on Cotton Africa or anything to do with African cotton. And those are the websites. We've actually built up great recognition worldwide since we were formed. We've signed a MOU with COMESA. We've been with the International Cotton Advisory Committee, which is the World Authority on Cotton. We've been sending our people to China. We've visited the Shanghai Trade Fair. And basically, we've had cooperation with Corporate Council of Africa from the US. And we're now partnering with most of the global institutions. Again, very clear, with our thinking. It's promoting market access. We were instrumental in the extension of AGOA in 2006 with one position paper, which was very crucial at the time. Otherwise, we were having a South Africa paper, a Mauritius paper, a Kenyan paper, a Lesotho paper, and I don't think we would have got far if we had all these different position papers coming on the hill. What we've done of late is we've managed to get a European market access with single transformation, a great plus for Africa, because we've had the European market for the last 30 years, but without the exception of Mauritius and Madagascar, I don't think any of the other African countries have benefited out of that market access. And we've told the Europeans, look, why don't you model it around the AGOA framework where a single transformation will actually bring in those jobs and give us greater market access. That has happened from this year, and that's a great plus for us. Of course, there are other regional bodies and regional markets that we are always looking at, and we are proactively looking at developing the trade policy. One of the things that we're trying to do is promote a regional value chain. What we've realized over the period of time is that our customers want speed to market. And for us to have speed to market, it doesn't make sense for us to import out of China and garment in Africa. The buyers are now looking at a 45-day window. And this has all happened with the consumer taste that has changed. The stores like Zara, H&M, if you go to the stores today, it's no longer spring, summer, autumn, winter. It's like a new collection every week. And for that new collection every week to be serviced, we've got to have a regional, local supply chain. So what we're promoting right now is Brand Africa, Buy Africa, Origin Africa, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the later part of my presentation. But basically, we're trying to promote a full value chain from farm to fashion, and that's the value proposition that we would like to bring onto the table. Of course, regional integration is key, and I talked about the MOU with COMESA. We now have an MOU with EAC, and the same is going to happen with SADC, and we're quite instrumental with the three tripartite agreement that's going on between SADC, EAC, and COMESA to make it one big trading bloc. And there's ongoing alignment with national strategies of every country. And we're actually very, very supportive. We've seen in Uganda, we launched last year the textile policy, which has now been ratified by the government. Kenya has done the same. Ethiopia is doing that. We're now in the process of developing a textile policy for Malawi. And later on this year, we're also doing one for Mauritius. So we're actually coming up and looking at the country in its individual capacity and see what is your core competence, what is your strength, how can we help, how can we do it differently? Because the market out there is huge and immense, and you'll see the numbers which I'm going to show you later on. So we were, like I said, involved in that negotiation with APAS as well, and the East ESA group and the ESA group. So we had a lot of input there as well on how we should move forward. We also had the first ever organic cotton value chain in Uganda. That was in 2008, where Uganda is the 7th largest grower of organic cotton, but very little does it make in the international scene. And that Made in Africa label is not really coming out so strongly. So we want to showcase Africa in a very different value proposition. Now, these are the statistics on AGOA. As you can see, I've just done the last 3 years. 2007, all AGOA exports, textile and apparel, $51 billion. 2008 went up to $66 billion. And 2009, it went down to $26 billion. Now, that is all exports, including oil and everything else. You can see the market correction around the 2008 mark, and a lot of exports from Africa slowed down. A lot of it was oil, but also there was a drop in pricing for the oil, and for that reason we've seen that dip. But the situation is almost similar on the textile and apparel side. If you look at 2007, 1.3 billion exports, 2008, 1.1, and last year 934 million. The numbers in 2010 don't look very good. To give you an example on Kenya, last year we did an export of $182 million, which is down from $240 million. And this year, on to June, for the first 6 months, we've only done $82 million. So if you double that, we're going to close at about $160 million, which will be lower than last year. And I've been talking to my colleagues from Lesotho. I think their numbers are exactly the same. And that is why I think we are here today to look at a revitalized AGOA. The other statistics that come out of this whole thing is that if you look at 934 million as opposed to 26 million on that screen, so that shows that textile and apparel is really less than the total exports is about 2.5% of the AGOA exports. And if you look at 2008, maybe it's less than 1%. So everything else is far bigger in value that is being exported out of Africa. And yes, the focus has been on the clothing textile value chain. If you look at vice versa, what has the U.S. done with Africa? In 2005, exports out of the U.S. were $10 billion. In 2008, exports increased by 80% to $18 billion. So in the grand scheme of things, there's trade both ways. And I would like to maybe make a comment that the African Growth and Opportunity Act definitely has been good for Africa, but it has also been good for America. Statistics on textile and apparel. The global size of the pie, as I would call it, is $580 billion. That's the entire global demand. The U.S. market is almost 50% of that, which is $270 billion. The world fiber demand is about 80 million tons, and the world cotton demand is about 26 million tons, out of which 3 million tons of cotton is being produced in Africa, a lot of it in West Africa and the C4 countries, and that is about 12% of the world's cotton is being grown in Africa. Unfortunately, 95% of that cotton is exported in raw forms. And this is what we are trying to say, that we can add value to that cotton, and we don't want to sell raw cotton, we want to sell a T-shirt. So if you look at other trade preference programs that the U.S. has got, the numbers look very similar. 1.3 billion in 2007 for the Indian countries, going down in 1.2 in 2008, and in 2009, $884 million. The CBI countries also had a decline in export. But the Egypt QIZ program have seen an increase in export marginally in 2008.
5 minutes.
Thank you. Now, this is where I want to focus the rest of my energy on. Our major competing countries. Now, AGOA has been a great success, and there's no doubt about it. Congressman McDermott this morning mentioned that we should look at that glass as half full and not as half empty. We can argue about this all day, but I think he is right. We should look at it as half full. And thereby, I don't think we should undermine AGOA in any form. And giving similar trade preferences to already super competitive economies like Bangladesh and Vietnam and Cambodia will not help Africa. Actually, the DFQF bill, which is being proposed by Congress at the moment, is going to be detrimental to Africa and to all of the trade preference programs, including the CAFTA and NAFTA, Indian countries. So the gains that we've made since the year 2000 will be lost, and it will be a great social impact. And the statistics here show that the top line there is AGOA. Year 2000, we did $748 million export of textile and apparel to the U.S. It grew to $1.7 billion in 2004, dropped significantly to $922 million in 2009. We had a change of 48% from all-time high to last year, minus 48%. And if you look at Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, year on year they've been increasing sales. And last year, even with the global financial crisis, Bangladesh was 71% higher in export sales to the U.S. Cambodia, 31% higher in export sales to the U.S. And Vietnam, 98% higher in export sales to the U.S. So the point I'm trying to make is that these countries, be it LDC countries, are super competitive. They don't need help. They're helping themselves. And I think it's time that we, as the AGOA Forum and here in Washington, be very vocal about this, that this DFQF bill is not good for Africa. So the future of AGOA, how do we see it? We see that provision under the AGOA right now with the third country fabric provision will expire in 2012, and the AGOA legislative trade preference program will expire in 2015. And we feel with the next couple of years to go, that's not going to bring investment and growth into Africa. We're looking at now coming up with a single rule of origin for all AGOA African countries, so everybody, there's no discrimination. We would like AGOA to be a more permanent relationship between America and Africa, and we would like the third country fabric provision to be extended indefinitely. But key here is that we must instill buyer interest. The American buyer is not interested in buying out of Africa. He'd rather go to more, might go to Hong Kong and China. I think it's probably exotic for them to go out there. And we need to bring a twist into this whole bill, and let's bring the buyer to the table and tell him, listen, look at Africa differently. We are producing for the US, and there's a lot of things that we can do. So we would like to change the paradigm a little bit and not ask for anything more than what we've got, but maybe ask a little bit for the American buyer. Let him be incentivized in some form to buy from Africa. The opportunities are immense. Like I mentioned, we are, as the AGOA textile and apparel market, we only have 0.04% of the size of the pie. And we have huge potential to grow that size if the right policy framework is put in. We have a competitive advantage under duty-free market access, and I think that can be enhanced. Of course, there are challenges in Africa, logistics, infrastructure. I think yesterday there were whole workshops on logistics, infrastructure. The cost of doing business in Africa is higher. Cost of utilities are high. We see a speed-to-market situation which is being difficult for us because we don't have a local supply chain. We see declining sales prices, declining buyer interest. But predictability and sustainability beyond 2015 is what we are looking for. And I think that's what we should be fighting for. And this unfair competition out of the subsidy programs in Asia really are detrimental to Africa because we have no export subsidies. And I want to talk a little bit about this in my next slide. My last slide, okay. All right. I'll hurry this up. The dynamics into the textile and apparel world have changed totally. And this happened in 2010. And the reason I'm saying this, for the last 10 years, every time we made a submission to the US administration, they've said to us that, what have your countries done to increase the size of the pie? And what has your government done to support you to become globally competitive? And I think it's been very difficult, an uphill battle for all of us in Africa, because we just could not compete. And we realized the reason we could not compete is India, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, they were all giving subsidies to their factories. So what happened on 29th April 2010, India withdrew export subsidies of 6.8% and added an export tax on the primary raw materials, that is cotton yarn and cotton, and even banned the exportation of cotton. So what they were doing for last over a decade, they were depressing world prices. Pakistan followed suit. 15th May 2010, they put an export tax of 15% on cotton yarn. What this did is that the prices of cotton yarn went up from $2.40 to $4 a kilo. And all of a sudden, we are now wondering in Africa that, listen, at $4, it's competitive for us to make yarn. I'll give you my own example. I shut down my spinning plant in December 2009. I could not compete with dumping prices out of Asia. And the good news is we're restarting our factory this month. We've realized that we can't compete with dumping prices. And I think the same thing is happening with the appreciation of the Chinese RMB. It's giving their exporters a great advantage. It's one thing talking about US farm subsidies, but the Asians are subsidizing their industry massively as well. And I think that unlevel playing field is what we need to fight for, or fight against rather. So the action plan is market potential is immense. We can actually enhance our competitiveness. We should carve out a niche market from farm to fashion, get that buyer interest, instill that buyer interest, advocate for a level playing field, and really finally brand Africa. And brand Africa, I just want to mention this, that we're having a showcase of Africa in Mauritius on the 10th of November. We're actually going to launch this brand called Origin Africa, and that's the brand that we're going to walk with in the catwalk in New York and Paris and Milan to actually tell the world that, yes, Africa is here to stay. And those photos on the right is a designer showcase that we did in Nairobi. And that was on the 28th of April this year. I have to close now, but this is a must. The lions of Africa are ready to roar. Thank you.
Thanks, Jas. Fabulous presentation. I'd like. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, speak and then continue.
I'd like to now bring Mr. Monyane up, Nkopani Monyane. Dumela Ntate.
Just for a second, I'm going to bring your presentation up. Yes. Did you get the cover? Thank you. It's not yours. No.
Okay, I'll just
No, it's right here. Okay. Here, you go. Right.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'm in a comfortable position where I follow suit from our chairman of the African Cotton Textile and Industry Federation, who, as we are members of the federation as the Lesotho Textile and Exporters Association. But as my memory takes me back sometime in the 70s, I will not assume, and this memory is from a film I watched then, way back in the 70s, called Bad News Bears. And the coach there was saying to his young cubs, the little boys who were playing the baseball team, do not assume. Because if you do, you make an ASS of you or me. So I will not assume that we all know where Lesotho is and what country this is. We are members of of ACTIVE. We are a small country situated in the southern tip of Africa, and we have a landmass of 30,355 kilometers. The 5 kilometers is very important when we have such a small landmass. Square kilometers, that is. We are predominantly a country that is reliant on textiles. That is our major production. The theme for this session here is Beyond Textiles, and we want to say to ourselves, are we talking about beyond textiles or besides textiles? And I don't want to even go long in this because Jess has gone right through what one needed to say in this particular context. And that is that we need to consider here, as we look at this theme, not only what happens beyond this textile era, but what are the building blocks that we use from the textile era, if I may call it that, to build on our economies. And that is that we already have a strong base. For some of us, this has been the kingpin of our economies. And it is not an issue of saying now we want to get out of this, going to something else, because life doesn't go that way. You don't make those changes like you want to put on this shirt today and put another tomorrow. It involves livelihoods of people. It involves in our country, predominantly the new breadwinners who are the women. It involves the massive people who are employed in this particular sector, and necessarily, if you are going to make changes around here, these matters have to be taken into consideration. In this respect, also, we're saying we build on the agricultural phase, which is important. We build on what we have, the complementarity, the vertical integration that has to come through that. And as you see, it's like I'm parroting what Jess has already said in this particular respect, because these are the issues. This is exactly what we have to consider to be able to go forward. I have already talked about what Lesotho is, and we have a small population of 2 million. Our currency is pegged to the rand, South African rand, that is 1-to-1, and we are members of this regional bloc that I have mentioned here. We are a member of Active, and the development of our textile, of course, is of our market, of the economy, has been predominantly reliant on the AGOA-inspired textiles industry. When this happened, when AGOA came on to being, in our context, then you found that mainly Taiwanese foreign direct investors came through. This was not by accident. It was by design. They were looking at the opportunity, and also our government was going out aggressively to attract foreign direct investment. This was good in one way, but it also has been a problem in some other way, because we were talking mainly get the foreign direct investor will get us jobs. So our message was investment, jobs. For us, jobs; for them, the investment. And what has this meant? It effectively, for some means that AGOA, in our respect, has turned out to be what is the acronym again? It is AGOA. It is supposed to be African Growth Opportunities Act. It has turned out to be Asian Growth Opportunities Act in Lesotho. So this is where we see the opportunity to turn around the whole issue, to say now, do we really make it African growth? I was saying Asian again. African growth opportunities as it was intended to be. And in this particular regard, the changing dynamics that my chairman in Active has referred to are beginning to come in play. I will talk about that later. In the sense that the recent crisis, the economic global meltdown, has, in a sense, told us to wake up to the realities here and begin to see what is going on. You have been given the figures. This will only refer to Lesotho. And what this tells us here is that, yes, there are possibilities of intra-African trade. Even for a small country like ours, as you can see, our business in SACU is increasing. SACU, by the way, is the Southern African Customs Union, which I'm told is the longest existing customs union on the globe. So things do begin in Africa. So this under this in this it reflects here that yes, there are possibilities here, and we should build on increasing intra-African trade here. The regional trade that yes has talked about. We do know that as has been indicated, the trade with the U.S. has come down for the reasons given. I will not go into that again. One thing I want to highlight in this particular respect, in terms of the Asian Growth Opportunities Act and the development of Asia here, is again to re-emphasize the danger of continuing to develop Asia under these preferences. The logical argument that has been put forward, and there's nothing to take away from that, it is that they don't need any help. The figures do indicate. But I wanted to re-emphasize also in the context of showing the need for regional integration, the need for bringing things closer home. The last bit there, the lead times for us in Lesotho, in terms of getting our garment through to the U.S., we take 180 days to do that. And if and why is that? Because we have to source the fabric. It has to go through on the ship for 30 days before we start production. By the time we are 5 days into production, 15 days into production, the Cambodian, the Vietnamese, the Bangladeshi has landed its product in the U.S. So the tips are scaled there. So we need to do something there. And how can we do that? We have to get the value chain that was referred to, get the cotton in Africa, so that if I can get cotton in South Africa, if I can get the fabric in South Africa, the following day I can start producing, cut down on that lead time. The lead time there also brings us down to the issues of having, of course, to deal with the cheaper type of products, because fashion doesn't stay for 180 days. So you have to have it on the market daily. And what does it imply with this reducing prices as the pressure that we have been told about? If you are going to be dealing with T-shirts and T-shirts only, we are definitely not going to survive. So where is the answer? Africa must unite. So diversification is urgent and critical. What is this diversification? Of course, we have to move away from textiles into other industries. And in doing so, we are talking about, in the context of textiles here, the improving the value chain here. Competitiveness must be improved. What comes into those issues there of competitiveness? The U.S. government will help us greatly if it will not pass this contemplated bill, because it will only just kill us in terms of that competitiveness. But also, we are talking about the capacity building so that the productivity is improved there, and so that we can be in a position to meet those lead times and be much more competitive. In looking at this, we have to look at supporting our relative efficiencies. We should not be competing against each other, but we should be looking at our respective efficiencies. This has been put before you. I'm just only repeating. If there is cotton and lint in Zambia, let it be produced there. Apparel will be produced in Lesotho. Apparel will be produced in elsewhere. So let us not compete, but be competitive and cooperative in terms of that. But I want to dwell on the issue of capacity that we require to be able to do that. And what is this capacity? For us, we have a lot of people who can make garments, but can they run a factory? I gave an example once to an indication also to my workers to say to them, look, you have been with these investors here for over 20 years. John is a particularly nice chap. He's unlike most of Chinese, but he's a particularly nice chap. What if you were to say to you, look, guys, I'm leaving tomorrow. I've had a good time. You have helped me be what I am, the millionaire the billionaire that I am. This is my present to you. What would happen to the factory? How long is it going to last? So the capacity is required to be able to get people in proper things, to be run things, and to go on to higher level product to be able to be competitive. We are from the World Cup a few days ago. It is time, Kinako, and it is time for Africa. And this is our theme as we have heard in Active. Thank you.
We're going to continue to move on. I know that the women have to leave at 10:30, so I'm going to ask Mr. Navdeep Sodhi to come present. And then I'll ask our Mauritius colleague to come and offer just a couple remarks, and then we'll turn to Mr. Landy. I wasn't told that you had to leave at 10:30 until now. Okay.
Okay, which? Which one is it? Okay, great. Before you leave, I just want to save it on the, afterwards. So before you leave. All right, great. You can go ahead.
So 10 minutes.
To say that I love textiles would be stating the obvious, but we have to move beyond. I have been allotted 600 seconds, and I would like to do justice with that. This presentation is divided into 4 parts. We would like to quickly take a snapshot of how the cotton textile industry looks like, and our focus is on West Africa. Secondly, I would like to highlight about 10 diversification initiatives that have taken place over the last 5 to 6 years, particularly in Nigeria, and which is the theme of today's presentation, that is beyond textiles. I would also like to highlight some prospects for AGOA and leave some food for thought. Textiles used to be the largest employer in West Africa only after the government, but it has shrunk, as you can see from the numbers. There are many reasons for the decline in this industry, but if we have to summarize, there are 2 broad reasons. One is that the cost of doing business in Africa is high, and the infrastructure is not efficient, and the textile industry needs a lot of efficient infrastructure, particularly power. The second reason for the decline of the textile industry in West Africa is the huge surfeit of illegal textiles being smuggled into West Africa, and particularly originating from China. What has happened? A few manifestations to show here. Now, this chart shows the situation of cotton production in 11 major cotton-producing countries in Sub-Sahara. The green bar shows the production, and the blue bar shows the exports. And as you can see, the green and blue bar are more or less equal in size, which shows that most of the cotton which is produced in these countries gets exported in its raw form with little conversion or transformation. This shows how the employment in the Nigerian textile industry, which was the engine of the textile industry in whole Africa, declined from an employment of almost 200,000 people directly employed in the textile industry in mid-80s. It declined to almost 20,000 presently. But people did not stop using textiles. The demand for textiles was growing, but it was being supplied from elsewhere. As I mentioned, Africa specialized, particularly in West Africa, in the production of African prints, which were the domain of the textile industry in Nigeria. But a lot of these textiles these days are imported from China, and a lot of these are counterfeit. As you can see from some of the markings shown here, it says made as Nigeria, and even the brand name has been faked. So this is really hurting the textile industry in West Africa. Now let's look at beyond textiles, because we cannot keep crying about our own fate. So, which is why many industries in Nigeria, which were very strong in textiles in the last 50 years, have taken some initiatives to diversify. And let us look at these initiatives from 3 perspectives, because there have been 3 facets of diversification. One is technical textiles, second is infrastructure and retail, and the third is agricultural processing. And I would like to show you some live examples. PET recycling. Alchem in Nigeria, along with its sister firm Extrupet in South Africa, and through their various affiliates, they pioneered this manufacture of the recycled polyester in Africa. So 5 plants to recycle PET bottles were set up all over Africa, the largest being now in South Africa and the second largest being in Nigeria. I would like to show you the journey of a PET bottle. We are all familiar with the water bottle, and a lot of them are discarded. Here is a sample of a few water bottles collecting from Nigeria. Why do they look dirty? It is because they have gone through a lot of transformation in the post-consumer era. Normally we discard our bottle after consuming the water, but in places in Africa where there's a lot of fuel scarcity, these are also used as a measure for, and also for a container to sell fuel, which is why they are so dirty. These bottles are converted into these flakes, and the flakes are converted into these granules, which in the end are converted into polyester fiber. So a lot of the duvets and the pillows you use in the night to give you a comfortable sleep actually comes from here. So let me say sweet dreams. This is part of the technical textiles. I don't know how many of you know that about 30 kilos of textiles is used in one motor car. If you go down today and look at the ceiling of your car, it is made from technical textiles, from things like this. If you look at the floor of the car or the trunk of the car, it is made from fibers like this. And let me say the most important thing here. This company, Alchem, employs 400 people directly, but 1,600 people indirectly, because they have set up about 12 collection centers to collect these PET bottles all over Nigeria, and they have provided with hydraulic presses, and therefore a lot of jobs have been created in the informal sector. And to say the least, this is part of the corporate social responsibility to clean up the environment. And the next challenge for this company is to convert a used or recycled PET bottle back into a food-grade PET bottle. And that's the challenge which will be the real test of technology. Okay, now let me move to another example. This is the story of polypropylene woven sacks, and 2 large companies like the Dangote Group, which we know very well, and the Bhojsans Industries, they pioneered the production of these polypropylene woven sacks. What is a polypropylene woven sack? The policy of the Nigerian government encouraged the local production of cement, which means that the cement had to be bagged in Nigeria, and therefore it created the foundation for this industry in Nigeria. And also with about 6% annual growth of agriculture, all these goods have to be packed in Nigeria, and therefore it created a huge demand. And it also created backward linkages, because one company from Indonesia, Indorama, they revived a defunct refinery to start the petrochemical business. So therefore, even the polypropylene chips which are used to manufacture this material are now produced in Nigeria. So a total forward and backward linkage. And let me tell you that the world's largest factory to produce woven sacks, which has a capacity of 1 million sacks per day, is located in Nigeria. This is the process of circular weaving, the process through which these sacks are produced. On the right-hand side, you see the logo of the company Starlinger, which is the world leader in this technology, which produces these special bags for packing cement called the AD Star bags. Okay, now let's move to malaria. Another special initiative in Nigeria to diversify beyond conventional textiles, because many of these things you do not compete with China, and therefore you can have a sustainable advantage. The mosquito nets are very important because they have been found to be very effective against malaria, particularly for infants and pregnant women. In Nigeria alone, it is estimated that there is a demand for about 60 million nets, that is to at least have one net per household. The company Sunflag, which is well known in Africa because they have their textile manufacturing capabilities in East and West Africa, so they pioneered the production of these long-lasting insecticide-treated nets in West Africa. They have a capacity of 1 million nets per annum, which is still quite small compared to the demand, but they are expected to grow. And this is also an initiative for diversification. Then there are other companies which made other diversification efforts. The Holborn Group, they started production of PVC pipes. The Speco Mill and Sunflag Group, they started the production of steel using their previous defunct textile manufacturing factories. And this was to meet the demand for steel used in construction and infrastructure. Then, last but not the least, the Chelarams Group, which is about 100 years old in Nigeria, they have tied up with the KFC Group last year, and they plan to set up 50 KFC retail QSRs, that is quick service restaurants, all over Nigeria. Agro-processing. This is another big initiative that happened from the Chandrai Group, which owns the Olam, based in Singapore. Olam International is the largest exporter of processed agricultural products, not only from Nigeria, but from many other countries. So they converted the previous textile factories into processing of sesame, and the production of sesame in Nigeria increased from less than 30,000 tons per annum to more than 90,000 tons per annum. And most of this sesame is now being hulled, which means that from the sack, it can directly settle on your McDonald's bun or wherever you want it. And this hulling facility was set up in these former textile mills. They also set up 3 rice mills in Nigeria to process the local rice. And this initiative was done in collaboration with the USAID in Nigeria. And this has helped to diversify Nigerian economy and also boost non-oil exports. This is the sesame hulling plant. What are the prospects for AGOA? We feel that these diversification initiatives, these need to be encouraged. Second is, we know that it is very difficult for Africa to compete because we are not playing on a level playing field. The third is that the tariff preferences alone under AGOA will not be sufficient for us to compete. And therefore, what Africa needs is a lot of support in building the capacity in infrastructure and also creating the regional linkages. Thank you.
I'm going to let my colleague Steve Landy just mention a few words and then bring Sui Lin Wak Sikli Hee up immediately thereafter. Steve, a couple minutes.
No, I think. When you're from New York City and you're given 3 minutes, you can talk so quickly no one understands you, or you may have to spend a few moments and think. So let me perhaps begin my presentation now, stick within 3 or 4 minutes, and then later on maybe go in more detail. Let me just pick up from the last slide of Mr. Sodhi. You are in Washington. Washington is a political city. It does us no good. I'm speaking directly and I'm shortcutting, I apologize, but it does us no good to say we want infrastructure. We want more support for regional infrastructure. We want more support for capacity building. Washington is a city that has specifics. Exactly as McDermott said, I had a bill, it didn't get what I want. There is now a need for a new bill or an extension or perfecting a AGOA trades provision, but again, as Sodi said, we have to go beyond them. We have to go beyond them. So what I did last night when I heard that you were coming, and as well as the other people here, I said, what exactly is on the agenda? You're going to sit in on the AGOA forum where these issues are going to be discussed with the Africans, with the African ministers. You're going to go out to KC, hopefully do a lot of business, but they're also going to discuss policy, particularly farm policy. So I've listed a couple of issues which I want to go through again very quickly because of the time limit and so on. It's one thing to say I want capacity building. It's another thing to say what type of capacity building do I want in the trade area? And that strikes me as very simple, that where there is an opportunity to export, whether for women generally across the board, we want to make sure that the holistic U.S. government, whether it's the MCC, whether it's the U.S. aid program, whether it's the Export-Import Bank, whatever it is, that that's available to work with us to develop this export opportunity. It may require infrastructure, but all we are recommending very specifically is to say, identify an opportunity, and instead of bringing in big aid programs and, big Chinese infrastructure and all that other jazz, identify what is necessary to get that export to market and work. Successes have been cashew nuts, shea butter, but there's a lot more successes that are out there and so on. There is nothing Africa needs more than economies of scale. You cannot have 47 independent countries created by the map in Berlin or by the Chinese, by the Europeans when you finally kicked them out. But they can't very well just survive on that. So that's why regional communities are so important. Yet the key donor countries do not give the priority to regional communities that they must, because they work much more on a national basis. And I say this for the U.S., for China. European Union almost destroyed them with their economic partnership agreements. This is an important issue, and it should be focused. And this message, I think, should be delivered. Infrastructure, very simple request. We're not going to build roads like China. We could work with China to make sure the roads don't only pull out resources, but add value added. And that's something that the U.S. has a strategic economic dialogue with China. It should be raised. We should work together. However, believe it or not, the U.S. major infrastructure program, what they call the Millennium Challenge Corporation, has nothing to help regional integration, has nothing to support the development corridors, has nothing to support the regional hydroelectric powers, has nothing to support the river basin group. So again, simple recommendation is not enough to say infrastructure. Say we want infrastructure, which means MCC infrastructure. Let me decide which of my 3 points I'm going to choose. I would choose security. The U.S., everyone says you must have a security of concessions for people to make investment. We should make AGOA permanent, longer, and so on. But we also must come up with a better system for operating in countries with fragile democratic systems. What we did in Madagascar, in my view, although the motives were good, were inexcusable. We took an industry called textiles, employing mainly women, and because a bunch of thugs and coup leaders, I don't know who the heck they were, grabbed power, we punished them by throwing women out of work. I don't understand that. There are targeted sanctions in this world that work better. You work with the African countries together. So this is something which, again, your voice, not defending thuggery, not defending bad governance, but you say, please work with Africa. I always like to say, use the African way to get something done and works fine. And I get the last one, and then I will shut up because my partner will fire me if I don't, and so on, is people talk about product coverage. We talked a little bit of it yesterday. It turns out that there's a few products in agriculture, but crucial to certain African countries, that are not covered under AGOA because of a very technical reason. I won't bore you with the tariff-rate quotas. But peanuts, groundnuts all over Africa, sweetened cocoa, that's the idea of value added, tobacco, which is now Mozambique, Tanzania. We're not suggesting more smoking. We're saying if you're going to get your tobacco, at least get it from Africa instead of buying it from Europe or from Brazil and so on, that these products are not covered under AGOA. And if there's one message you can deliver when you're in the agricultural community, I'm finished, I'll stand up, that you can please live it. My final conclusion is that we all love Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton has stood for certain things in our lives, and one have been gender. The fact that you are all here, I hope you do some private sector business with you later, but I'm told that it's a good negotiation. New Yorkers, Nigerians, women, put them all together. But I just want to thank you all for coming and spending time. And I'm only sorry I don't have 10 more minutes, but that's life. Thank you.
You're not fired, but you are on probation. Ms. He, to concluding remark on all of this from a textile producer from Mauritius, bienvenue.
Merci. Thank you very much, and I'm very proud to be with you today. And we thank you to have invited us, the delegation of Women Entrepreneurs of Africa. I'm proud to be part of them. The delegation is here, and we are the new leaders of Africa. We want to be the wind of change. We thank our Hillary Clinton, the Congresswoman, who has advocated for our presence here. I think that we have to thank them. We are 35 women entrepreneurs from Africa, women leaders representing our country, and today we advocate for the group of active. We were very impressed about all the presentations and inspiring presentations and figures that we have been having this morning, macroeconomic part of Africa. And we really want you to take us on board, because we are here within these 2 weeks to be the voice of AGWA women entrepreneur leaders. So we want really you to take us on board, and we will do our homework where we will organize our voices. And we say to our country, any country who doesn't care about 50% of the resources, women represent 50% of the world resources. Why they are very silly, stupid not to tap into women resources and the talents. We talk about infrastructures, we talk about big, which is common for all entrepreneurs, being man or woman. I myself is in an industry. We have a lot of women in Africa who are working a lot to make all this happen at macroeconomic level, even though we are only recognized mainly part of the world as micro enterprises. We want to raise our voices to say that we are part of the planet, and we have due participation and due recognition of our value to the world. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much for those concluding remarks to this panel. I regret that our women entrepreneurs have to go to another engagement, as much as we'd like you to stick around. But I hope you benefited from this presentation. I think we assembled a great panel, starting with Congressman McDermott. We're going to break now, have coffee. Let the women exit, if you don't mind, first, because I know they have to catch a bus. Okay? And then we'll break outside for coffee, come back to the next panel. Our panelists, for those who are remaining, will stick around here for the next 15 minutes and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you all for coming, and women, we'll see you in Kansas City. Thank you.